Hi, folks. I wanted to give you a quick heads up about today's episode. We cover some pretty strong themes, and so I want you to go into it aware of that so you can make the choice of whether you continue listening or not. We're going to cover some themes that include people's experiences of terrorism, as well as some descriptions about medical procedures and death and loss. So again, please take this at your own pace. We love to have you listen, but we also understand if perhaps you're going to give this one a pass. Take care. Welcome to The Path Forward, Mental Health with MAPS. I'm Dr. Gina Pasquale, the host of this podcast and the Executive Director of MAPS Counseling Services. Our goal with this podcast is to bring people together to discuss lived experience, to examine the struggles, the growth, and the vast reality of how mental health affects all of our lives. Today, on this episode, we have a guest with us who is going to talk about resilience, both as an individual and the capacity for communities to come together and to grow and be resilient. Julie Schoelzel, the CEO of the Greater Monadnock Collaborative, is here to talk to us today. So welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here.
It's nice to have you. What we start with each episode is just a little something to ground ourselves. We call it our compass check. So today I'm going to walk us and our listeners through something that most therapists actually do fairly regularly with their clients, something very easily accessible. And so I'm going to walk us through that. It's a pretty simple thing called a grounding technique for the senses. Does that sound okay?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So if everyone, whether you're listening or sitting here with me, if you want to just kind of get comfortable in your seat or wherever you might be, and take a couple deep breaths in. And now what I want you to do is just in your mind, name 5 different things that you can see. And now, name 4 different things in your environment that you can touch or feel. Could be the textures of clothing, the smoothness of a table. And now, 3 things you can hear in your environment. And 2 things you can smell. And 1 thing you can taste. If you breathe just gently in through your mouth, you often can notice a little bit of a taste sensation. And then a couple more deep breaths. And then we'll bring our focus and attention back here, and we'll begin. So Julie and I had the opportunity to sit down and to talk about the importance of sharing the human struggle, the importance of trauma-informed spaces, the role of connection and healing, a wide range of things. And while our intention on this podcast is to take a deep dive into one particular moment of people's lives, I think where you and I landed as we meandered through your life is that you've had 3 very significant turning points that we felt like would be really valuable to share. And so maybe we can start there if that feels comfortable with you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We'll start way back at the very first one we had talked about. So if you can give our listeners, maybe just start to paint the picture.
Yeah. That sounds good. So I graduated college in the year 2000 and took a year to have a job locally. I lived at home with my parents and then knew that it wouldn't be like what I did forever. I just sort of took a year to kind of figure it out. And then so in September of 2001, I got my first job that was tied to what I had studied in school, and it was in New York City. And so I started commuting into New York City. I believe my start date was September 5th of 2001. And it was really exciting. It was challenging because I was still living at home and I had sort of an epic commute. I would get up, and my parents would like to get up with me, which I think is just
sweet.
super cute. But we had to get up early. It was like 5:30, and they would make me coffee and breakfast, and then I would drive to a mall where I would catch a bus, which would go over the Hudson River, over the what was then called the Tappan Zee Bridge, commute from on the Hudson line into Manhattan, into Grand Central, and then take a subway downtown to Union Square. And in my second week, I was coming out of the subway in Union Square, and I had a Discman, and I wish I could remember what I was listening to. And I'm someone who, if like music's on or TV's on, I'm like focused on it. And so I was deep into my daydream with my headphones on, walking north on towards Park Avenue, coming out of the train station. And I think I kind of registered that people were responding to something, but I wasn't yet. And then a woman grabbed me and was like, turn around. And then I turned around and she went, that plane just hit that building. And it was obviously the start of 9/11. And in that moment, it felt, I don't want to say it felt casual, but it just felt like one of those crazy kind of New York things that happens. And I'd always grown up on the outskirts of New York, had spent a lot, like went to the city often. But did go to my office really quickly. And, it's one thing to point out. I was talking about my parents getting up with me earlier in the morning. That morning, my mother, who we kind of joke, but maybe I don't think it's actually a joke, but that she was just very intuitive. And she made a list of phone numbers for me to have with me. And she was like, you should have these with you at all time. And I'm not even being sarcastic when I say it was like 25 numbers. And I was like, I'm not going to call like my Aunt Marion in upstate New York ever, like in an emergency. And she was like, you never know, like just take these numbers. And so I go in and I had those numbers on me, and they'll come into the story later. And
I think one of the things that's important for our youngest listeners to know too is that this was way before you had a cell phone where
I didn't have a cell phone.
It wasn't even happening yet.
Yeah.
So we all relied on.
Yeah. Some people did have cell phones, but I didn't. I actually didn't have a cell phone until 2006. I was a strong holdout on the cell phone. So no, I didn't have a cell phone, But I was like, I should go call my dad and just tell him I'm okay. My mom was having her first day at a new job near where they lived also. So I knew it was kind of a busy morning. So I called and I left a message on the answering machine like, hey, just FYI, like heard a plane, flew into one of the Twin Towers, and I'm fine. And where I was working was like 2 miles from the Twin Towers. And you can see the Twin Towers at that. I mean, you could. 30 miles at least upstate.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
You could see them. 2 miles,
huge.
We had a direct view of them from our office window, which I had just written about to some friends of mine who had come in from out of the country, and we had gone downtown to see the Twin Towers and told them that I always thought of them when I looked out the window, wrote this nice email about it. And so was just sort of watching what was happening. And at that time, I was actually the only person in the office. A few minutes later, this was a shared office. It was two architecture firms. And so I was in one office, and no one from my company was there yet. And then a young woman from the other company would eventually walk in. And we just sort of did like a quick, like, wow, that's pretty crazy. I called a friend of mine because we had friends that worked in the buildings. And so I called her and I was like, how is everybody? She knew them better than I did. And she was like, they're fine. They all work in the other building. So nothing to worry about. So, okay. And, it felt weird, but it was just like, I got to go on with my job. Right. And so, but I also didn't know what I did because it's like day 6 of my job. And
you're in your early 20s.
Yeah. And I'm just like arbitrarily making photocopies, like trying to watch out the window and whatnot. And, time is going by, and this other woman and I are standing there sort of staring out the window. And as we were watching it, we couldn't ever see the second plane from the angle we had, or we missed it. It's hard to say, but I never saw the second plane, but the second building just exploded.
Wow.
And we both started screaming, like it was like, oh my God, what's happening? And I called my friend again, and I was like, the other building just exploded. And you have to remember too, this is like early days of the internet. So like for CNN to update its homepage was like many minutes. It wasn't like today where you could just refresh. And then it wouldn't even, now people were really going to CNN and wouldn't really reload. So it was just sort of like, and I'm naive, right? I'm like young, and I'm still not putting together what's going on. Like, and I talked to my dad one more time, and I remember being like, I can't, and he told me it was a plane. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why is everyone flying the plane so badly? And he was like, Julie, he was like, we're under attack. Yeah. And I was like, oh, and then he was already like, you should leave, like, try to get out, try to go north, it just feels like you should not be in that office with this one other girl that you don't know. But I was like a loyal, and still am, like, worker, right? Like, I was like, I just want to do my job well, and I want to hear it from my bosses, right? Like, I didn't want to just make that decision at that time. And so, the other architect would show up, and he actually had binoculars. This is something I didn't even mention to you, but I remember this, and I remember him looking and then putting them down. And then I said, can I look? And he said, no. And he put them away. And it didn't hit me until I would see later what was kind of going on down there, like what he was probably seeing.
What do you think
jumpers.
I think I know what he was seeing.
Yeah. And you couldn't see that visually from where I was. There was paper. I mean, the paper making its way north and stuff was unreal. Like, there was debris kind of really quickly, like, just sort of skirting by and stuff like that. And then I couldn't get through to anybody on the phone really anymore after a while, because the phone lines got super jammed up. The only person that I could get through to was my brother's office line, which I never would have had my mother not given me that list. And so, I'm trying different people, and then for some reason that one goes through. And so he picks up, and this is my brother Jim, and he's like, you need to leave. Like, this is only going to get worse. And I'm still like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I had called my boss, one of them who hadn't woken up when this all started yet. She was someone who worked really late into the evening. And, so I broke the news to her, and she, this is like kind of a cliche New York thing, but she was like, listen, if you're going to work in New York, you're just going to have to get used to this kind of thing. But she didn't know.
She didn't know the full scope.
And like,
of what
at
was
one
happening.
point, the Trade Center had been bombed, like in the 90s.
Right.
Like, this was not, she's just imagining sort of old
things happening again.
And I remember being like, oh, I was like, all right, well, we'll turn on the news, like, get your day going. And then when my boss came, who was an architect, and there was the two architects now, and I said, could these buildings fall? And they said, no way. These are completely built to withstand any kind of force like this. And this is what they're designed to take, all this kind of stuff. And I'm still on the phone with my brother. And now at one point he's like, what are people doing on the streets? And like, he's like, go look down and see what people are doing on the streets. And like, in my mind, it was like a mix. And there were people walking with debris on them. Like, now it's been a while, and like, people, have been leaving that area down there. And then some people are just walking casually, and I'm like, it seems like okay. And, and then while we were on the phone, the building began to fall. Yeah. Everybody started screaming in the office, obviously. And then, my brother didn't know what was going on. And so he was like, why is everybody screaming? What's happening?
Oh, gosh.
And then all these moments always have like a little bit of like, there's always back to humor, especially in my family, where, And he goes, "Oh my God, your building is collapsing." And then I was like, "Do you think I would be on the phone with you if the building was collapsing?" And he's like, "What is going on?" And I'm like, "The tower is collapsing." And he was like, "No way." Right. And then the architects, that's when everybody was like, "Oh my," like, and then they were like, "Get out." Like, just, and then my brother said, "What are people doing on the street?" And I was like, "Nah, people are starting to run." Like, this is like, very scary at this moment. And
so it was all just like so surreal.
So surreal.
Just nothing anybody could even wrap their head around. And so,
no.
And then it just kept escalating and
it just kept going. Yeah. Like, and that friend of mine that I had been calling, she was living in the city right near the Empire State Building. And she had actually had a party the weekend before. So lots of people who, we were all at that age where some of us had moved out, but some of us were still living at home. And so like a lot of people who were like still young and living at home, but couldn't get home, like just descended back on her part. It was the party again, right. Like basically.
Someplace familiar.
Yeah. They were like, "You don't really know me, but so-and-so invited me to this place. Like, and I know it's here." And, but before I got up there and I felt like I should buy food and stuff or snack. I was like, I don't know what to get. So I went to Gristedes, I think. And I remember walking in and walking by the produce and seeing a pear. And I'd never eaten a pear before. And I was like, I'm going to buy a pear because I've never had one. And I don't want to, like, what if I die? And feels like a totally stupid thing. But at the moment, it was just where my brain went. And I wasn't crying or anything like that. It was just like, and I remember buying beer and like snacks and this pear. And then I remember seeing a guy with water and I was like, that's a good idea to get water. And so I went and got some water, just totally not prepared, and then showed up at their apartment. And then that was really when things started to hit home because people were showing up covered in debris, like just totally, 23 years old. Sorry. Yeah. You knew they had been through something really terrible. And then watching the news and her building to her window just facing, the Empire State Building. And I just wanted to get home. I really just wanted to get home. And I was like, wearing like some polyester business shirt. And I remember just being so hot. And she gave me her T-shirt, which I still have.
Oh, you still have it?
Yeah. And we eventually they opened up Grand Central and they said you can take a train out of here. And so I said I'm gonna go back home, and walked to Grand Central, and then Grand Central is a huge building. It's not tall, but it's just takes up many blocks, and it goes underground. It goes really deep underground. It's a beautiful building. It is probably my favorite place in New York. There's nothing like commuting into New York and walking into Grand Central. Like, it's just a phenomenal feeling. So had to go really far underground to catch my train. And get in the car, and there are, again, people, just some of them covered in debris, and they turn the lights off for like 10 minutes and it's pitch dark. You're in a tunnel. And I'm sure that they're just dealing with tons of stuff, and they would do that normally sometimes. It was a long time. Like, it was taking a while to get the trains going and stuff. And so you were sitting in the dark and people were like weeping and, just super overwhelming. And there was one man who was like very distraught. And once we got out of the tunnel and he got service, he had a cell phone. And so he made a phone call, and his daughter's fiance died in the towers and had called to say goodbye to his fiance and this man's daughter. And obviously, it was just unbelievable circumstance. And so I take this train to Tarrytown, New York. And this is like when like real life kind of just bashes into the situation, and I get off the train and I have to go back on this bus. And the bus was like exact change only, which I did not have. And I just didn't take the time to make the change thing happen. And the bus driver was like, you can't get on this bus without exact change. And there are still people with debris. Like they're still on this journey, right? And like now people are like, what are you doing? Like she's getting on this bus. And he's like, that's the rules. And so people are getting change out. So I get on the bus and this is really silly. And then...
But all these people came together to make sure you could get on the bus on this day. And the bus driver likely was just so not knowing what to do, cling to the rules, cling to like the order of things.
Yeah. And, maybe he had gotten in trouble some other time for, whatever. So, no judgment against him. It was just one of those moments where it was like, oh, my God. And get off and then get in the car and then go home, kind of forgetting that it was my mom's first day at this new job. And I was just anticipating this like really warm welcome from my parents. And when I got home, they weren't there. And it's like probably 5 or 6 o'clock at night now. And that was like kind of what really, I just became so upset. I was like, I can't believe you're not here. And then I put the TV on. And at that point, they were showing the jumpers and I hadn't seen that yet. And that really like, obviously, like, just, it was like, oh my God, I was watching that. And like a military plane flew over the house and it shook everything in the house and it scared me. And then I went under the table and because I didn't know what to do. And then my parents came in and they, then they like were kind of like, oh God, we probably have a situation here with this one. I'm the youngest of 6. So they were pretty good at parenting by that point. And we watched some TV together. I don't remember really the rest of the evening. And I do remember another plane flying over and us running outside just to look at it because it was just not something we had seen really before. And then didn't go to work on Wednesday, but did go back to work on Thursday, which is something like now that I have children and I just look back on and I'm like, that is just insane. And as really the next day, I would find out that people I knew had died and I, not super close with, but like people I had memories with and been in their homes and, just all these, just unbelievable, and, but went back to work on Thursday. And on Thursday and this would be like the state of life for a while in New York, but when the train pulled back in, they evacuated Grand Central. Like something had scared them, and they were like, the alarm started going off. And again, Grand Central is this giant building. If you're underground, you've got minutes before you're anywhere near outdoors, right? And I just remember running and just being like, oh my God, is this gonna like blow up? And then getting out. And then I was like, well, I'm not taking a subway. And I literally ran like 20 blocks to work downtown. And no, I guess it was almost 30. And being so hot. Anyway, I just remember how hot and just being so thirsty. And the air was unbelievable. I mean, it just was this horrible smell of fuel and burning, very overwhelming. And by that point, Union Square had been sort of turned into like a makeshift place to grieve. It was where a lot of families who couldn't find loved ones went with flyers. But I actually didn't really venture in. I just wanted to get inside the building. And I just went to work, right? And I remember just being like, all right, like, and we just worked. Like, it was just like, you could see smoke from the window, and it was just like, we're just here to work.
Here
like,
to do our jobs.
Yeah, and so kept working, and then I remember going home that night, and then I actually went to take the subway home, and a father grabbed me and showed me a flyer and was like, have you seen my son? And it was just like, no. And went home that night and then realized, like, I can't go back in tomorrow. So I took a day off. And then I hung out with my sister that weekend. And And, just kept going, right? Like we just sort of,
knit it together and keep going.
And it was kind of an interesting thing in New York, I think, too, because it was like there was this sort of commitment to keep going, but then people would totally fall apart. Like, you'd go to a bar or something like that, and there would be this like commiseration around like how absolutely terrible this is. And moved out actually not too long after that into an apartment with a friend of mine. And it was just really heavy, but I don't think we just didn't talk about it really. Like, I'm sure we did, but it was just like, you just got to keep going. And, I didn't really realize how it was impacting me until October of 2002. And I was sitting outside with my mom. I was visiting my parents, and I was just sort of laughing or something. And then all of a sudden my mother started crying, and she was like, she's like, I just thought you were gone. Like, I didn't know if you'd come back. Because I guess I was, just obviously profoundly impacted by it.
And your mom, being the remarkable intuitive person, she picked up on that, and she could see that in you, but you were keeping yourself together and just going about with your life. Yeah.
And it was just this, I think that's a weird time in anyone's life, that age, and like those first years out of college, and just, you feel like there's this weird thing of like, you're an adult now, but you're not really like, in the adulthood that you see on TV with,
right.
Yeah, so,
we even recognize that now as a very distinct developmental period.
Yeah.
We call it emerging adulthood,
all
the way through age 25, 26, recognizing that it's sort of this bridge to adult life. But it's not what you see on TV.
No, and so, I think it's not a super easy time anyway.
What's remarkable to me, Julie, hearing you talk about this, when I think of somebody that age, when I think about that emerging adult period, and as this surreal event is happening, this profound tragedy that turned our country into before this happened and after this happened, that on that day when you went into that market, a piece of you looked at those pears that you'd never tasted before and decided, just in case you died, you needed to try it. Like, that to me is the spark of humanity and the spark of the human spirit.
Yeah.
Did you like the pear?
No.
Yeah.
It was a really mealy pear. I like pears sort of now in food.
The right ones.
And I don't eat them as like a fruit, just on its own. But I remember being like, kind of wishing I liked it more.
So that part of you, though, that recognized, I'm going to try this.
Yeah.
What part did that play in your resiliency moving forward?
That's just a huge part of who I am. And it's my father has that as well. So does my mom, but my father's just got it. Like, he just is someone who has real, there are things to look forward to, kind of. It was a part of our culture in our house. So I think I got it from that a little bit, just like, I don't know. I don't really know, but it's not, it's to this day.
Yeah,
like,
it's who you are.
This is really, this is not a great moment, but I can kind of, what's a good thing we can do, like right now or something like that.
Grab something life affirming.
Yeah.
Even in the face of tragedy.
Yeah. I have lost that on a few occasions, but like, generally speaking, it is my sort of default.
And you pick that up in your family of origin. You pick that up from your parents. Yeah. And so it sounds like they've played a key role in your life, even on your mom giving you the list of phone numbers. Yeah. Going home to your parents' house that night. Yeah. And so I think that segues us into the second really important turning period of your life involving your parents.
Yeah. So, I was unusually close to my parents, like even as a young person. When I went to college, you have that meeting with your school counselor, and, I don't want to be far away from my parents. And he was like, there's an all women's college 7 miles away. And I was like, perfect. and it's almost like that intuitive thing. Like, did I know that I wouldn't have as much time with them as I thought? Like, they weren't people who would live into their 80s or even mid 70s. They died kind of young. So very close to them. And then, when I was 30, what was I, 77, 33, so that's 2010, that, April, our mother let us know that she had late, stage 4 colon cancer. And it was the kind of thing where we thought we had a couple years somehow, and she was gone 8 weeks later. Wow. So it was fast, and it was totally, it shouldn't have been shocking, but she was such a strong person but looking back, we were like, oh, she was clearly in a lot of pain at that point.
8 weeks, though, from you personally finding out, to her dying. Yeah. That's a very short period of time to wrap your head around something like that.
Yeah. It is. And it's especially when you actually are hopeful at first, people, this is the hard thing when people get sick, right? There's like this sort of fear of hope, because I don't really know what the consequences are of having hope, but like, you don't want to appear that you don't get what's going on. And, I don't really share that. I'm like, if hope gets you through Wednesday,
let's do it.
Yeah. Like, just when you know, and no one, that never goes away. Like, I don't know. But anyway, so when you're feeling like hopeful that it's going to go a different way, it was terrible. And while she was, so the last 2 weeks of her illness, she was, in a coma basically, and on life support. And, I was with her and my dad, and a doctor came in to speak with my dad. And he said, you can't have a breathing tube in someone for more than, I think it was about 2 weeks. And so we can either take the breathing tube out and she'll die, or we could put a trach in her, which will keep her breathing, but won't have the tube in the throat. Because, I guess that breaks down your throat, and you just can't have one forever. And she would go to a facility where she would live until the cancer totally killed her. I would assume in a coma. I don't remember that really being discussed, but, and by that point, this sort of looming deadline, we knew it was a real thing. Like, we were already kind of accepting that this was going to be the end. And I just remember being so terrified. I was like, oh my God, like, what if my dad picks this choice and she goes to a facility and she's on a trach and she lives out 4 months in this. I just remember being so terrified, and no judgment to anybody else that makes that call. I didn't want to do it. But it was I really felt very strongly. My parents were such a team. Like, they were just so united as a team and fiercely defensive of each other. And I was like, I'm not going to tell Dad what to do, but I was really, really afraid. And he didn't answer the doctor right away. And he waited, I think because I was there, he maybe thought, well, Julie might want to do this. And so a whole day later, 24 hours later, now my sister had come and he takes us out to dinner and he tells us that he's not going to do it. And we were so relieved. And we tried to not show it exactly because we didn't know how to handle this, I feel like. But
well, what a mixture and confusing feeling to have to say you're relieved you're going to make. Yeah.
So, and then, we had a really beautiful time with her to let her go. And, again, with the humor kind of coming in, when you get to this point and people are explaining to you how it's going to go and they're going to pull the breathing tube out, it's going to be kind of hard to watch, but keep in mind, like, she's not in pain, all this kind of stuff. And so they do all that, but she's not going. and, you know, they said 20 minutes. Now it's been 2 hours and we're all just sort of sitting there, you know, and in the beginning we're like holding hands, but now it's like kind of like this weird, like, what is going on? Right. And we're all sitting there. And we had the lights off because hospital lights, I don't know what they're like now, but really a room for improvement with hospital lighting for these kinds of circumstances. So we had just turned the lights off. And the door flies open, and it's a maintenance man. And he's got this huge fluorescent light on his arm. And he walks in, he looks at her, he looks at us, and he's like, I can't fix that light if she's there. And so then I go, can you come back tomorrow? Because, like, she won't be there. And, like, we all start cracking up. And I just remember my dad, this is a good testament, my dad saying, he tapped her arm and he said, see, we're laughing again already.
Oh.
Just, you know, that's who we were. And so she passed, and that was terrible. And
yeah, mother loss is big loss.
And just so ill prepared for it. I feel very strongly that in our culture we could do more for those who are grieving. There's just such like an expectation that you just like get on with it, kind of. Like, they know you're sad, but it's like they don't want to, like, nobody wants to see it, and it's like hidden in a way. And I was living in New York City at that time, and I just remember like riding the subway all the time, always crying on the subway. But then realizing there's so many people crying on the subway, like at rush hour, like it's just full of people grieving, probably, you know what I mean? But so after she died, you know, I had a conversation with my dad because it scared me, that trach option. And I said, Dad, what would you, like, now that she's gone, you need to have these conversations with someone. What would you have done? What would you want done for yourself? And he said, I wouldn't want the trach. And that was the end of that conversation. And, you know, we worked to heal, and had an amazing trip with my dad and my sister to Paris, which was just awesome and sad sometimes. And, you know, amazing memories. And then I got engaged that Christmas.
So you as a family just continued to grab life.
Yeah. And my dad for sure too. Like just reaching out to old friends and just this, always this thread of optimism. But unfortunately, my father would have a massive heart attack. He would be alone and he would have a massive heart attack on the year anniversary that my mom went to the hospital and never came out. It was super confusing. But we figured it out. And I was actually up here visiting, because my brother had moved up here in the 90s and I would come up here a lot. I always think of this place as, we knew we didn't want to be in my parents' place for that first Christmas without my mom. So we did it up here. And I think it's neat that I live here now and I live close to my brother and my sister who are up here. So it's like just something I always think is a nice tie. But anyway, so, we kind of all the siblings gather. We're at the hospital. He's unconscious with a breathing tube, 2 doors down from the room my mother died in. And it's almost like we had like almost like a routine that we knew. Like when my mom was in the hospital, my brothers were great about making playlists and having a speaker so there could be music in the room. And it was like, this just came back. Like, I just remember that being like back really quickly with my dad. Like, we're here, we're making sure he's aware. And the stakes are a little different this time, right? His daughter's getting married in a few months. And I think that some of this impacted even how the doctors were looking at it, maybe. And, we were like, what are we going to do? And then they would try to take the breathing tube out, and my father could wake up and he could communicate and he could write. So he was fully there mentally, but he could not survive without this breathing tube. Whatever had happened with his heart had just weakened his lungs enough to make it impossible. And this is really challenging medical territory. And this doctor who was young, and I don't say that to sort of slam young doctors, but I do think there's sort of the more you see, the better you are at advising, right? And the hospital couldn't believe we were back. Like, they knew who we were, and they didn't want this. They didn't want us to go through this. Like, we had spent 8 weeks with them, not even a year earlier. And, you know, I informed him and my siblings, like, I've had this conversation with Dad. Like, he does not want a trach, and I don't know, like, what we should do. And the doctor was like, your dad is strong. He's totally there mentally. He's able to communicate. And I just remember him going, we're gonna do this. He's gonna walk you down that aisle. And it just felt like it should land better, but it didn't really. Like, and I was like, okay. And then we had to have a really hard conversation with Dad, and explain to him, you know, I know you said you didn't want this, but he thinks it. And I don't know what it's called, but when you have the power to make the decisions, because he was literally on every form of life support. He couldn't obviously eat or anything like that. And I had to tell him, you know, they're not able to wean you off of this breathing tube. He feels like we should do the trach. And I knew my father very well. And I said, I won't make it up to you to decide when this ends, you know, and I was like, I'll be there with you and I'll help you. Well, you know, and he pointed at me and he went like this, and I was like, I'll do it. And
what a remarkable act of love.
If I feel like if this is torture, you know, pretty much. And then he went like this, and then we all gathered, and he wrote this note, like, I have the best kids. And then he would not ever come off. And he would not walk me down the aisle. We would have to Skype him in. Which was obviously pretty hard. And, but he was amazing. He was amazing because there he was in his hospital bed. And, you know, we got lots of people to help at that point. He was going in and out of like nursing homes and rehabs and stuff like that. And, they got him like a dress shirt to wear, and, he made a sign that said, love you more. And, you know, he was cheering, and he would write, and they would tell us what he was saying, all this stuff. And my brothers walked me down the aisle, and my other brother was the minister. And it was really beautiful in a way, in every way, but extra beautiful. And a few months after that, you know, he got another infection. He had many infections, like C. diff and pretty much every hospital infection you could catch, he got. And it just was time, and we talked about it, and he understood. And, you know, I remember him saying, touch my face. And we did, and we let him go, and it was really tricky because the hospital, we were in a different hospital now because he had been in a nursing home that was closer to a different hospital than kind of what we had been used to. And they didn't necessarily all agree that it was time to let him go, which was really complicated. You know, he literally had like a heart, a pacemaker. So we had to let him die. We had to like turn off
the
all these
pacemaker.
things. It was like kind of a complicated day of here's this guy to do this. So the I remember the nurse who was mortified to have to tell us this came in and she was like, the hospital is considering delaying this and doing an investigation to decide if this is actually ethical. And, you know, my father probably weighed 65 pounds. This is a 6'4" man who had been over 200 pounds the whole time I knew him. A very strong, robust man that was, you know, so close to death, like just being kept alive. And because of his amazing brain was just still able to communicate, but it didn't, he would have been gone like so many times over with all the different things that had occurred. But, and it's a terrible thing to go through, but it was really something for me and my siblings to just know, like, we aren't gonna, like, we know what's right here. And
so you really were able to pull together, be a united front, kind of like your parents were always such a united team.
And we went downstairs to get lunch, and I had multiple healthcare, like doctors and nurses that I had never engaged with, but this had now gotten out, like at the hospital. Like and doctors were not happy. And this would become something I would become kind of into for a while. But they would come to us and go, what you're doing is heroic and it's the right thing to do. And they'll see that, like, just keep going. And it was just so surreal to just get these like whispers of affirmation of like, I'm sorry that you know, this is getting reviewed. So it was reviewed and it was unanimous. Like, oh yeah, this is, you know, he's really sick again. He's been hospitalized again. And he does not want to live this way. So, I remember they at one point said he's going to be languishing here for weeks, grasping for air, and he was gone in a couple hours.
Wow.
And you know, it was like, okay, like
it was time.
It was time. And it was such a surreal thing, you know. We had some not great experiences with some of the nursing homes. And again, this was in a different state. And like, I remember, so all right, first going back to this. So when my mother died, I was back at work 4 days later and like not handling it well. Really sad, profoundly sad. And like, I don't think anybody really knew so much at work that I just was like, and I was still doing like a really good job. And, did we talk about the lottery when?
No, we didn't talk about the lottery. So
like a few months after she died, this was like, you know, red flags. I was like, I started reading books about winning the lottery, and I was like, I'm going to win the lottery. And I had a boss who was a published mathematician, super smart guy. And I have a strong marketing and sales background. And so when I really want to sell something, I can be pretty effective at it. And we were meeting and I was like, I think I'm going to win the lottery. And he was French too. So he was like, this is absolutely insane, but I'm giving you $50 because you're so convincing right now. And I was like, all right, cool.
He's going to help you win the lottery.
Yeah. He was like, I got some, you know, we had this whole deal and I didn't win the lottery, and he was out $50. And my fiance at that point was getting a little bit worried, and then I go to work, and my boss is like, "You're doing amazing work. I want to promote you." And I was like, "Oh no!" And that's actually when it hit, and I said, "I'm not doing that great. I need time off before I can." And I took a month off. Nope. And I just wasn't paid. And I just like took care of myself for a month in my apartment in New York City and went and saw my dad a bunch. And he was healthy at that time. This was before he had the heart attack. And just took some time to rest also. Like, you know, grief is a physical.
Yes, it is.
It's so physical. And I don't think that gets enough, you know, attention. And then went back to work and, you know, took the promotion and all that stuff. And when my dad died, I called that same boss and I was like, I'm taking 2 weeks. I was like, I will not be checking in. And he was like really supportive, like just do what you need to do. And, I leaned into like comedies, I just watched every stand-up routine I could watch to kind of just get a laugh in whenever I could. Like I understood now, like I just don't want to overly lean into this. It wasn't like I wasn't aware of how terrible this was. And my mother wouldn't allow us to have a funeral, which I don't think helped me. We had a small family gathering at their apartment and we said some things, but it wasn't. And my mother had written, she had really good handwriting and she had written this like letter about what she wanted. And it was just like, just have a small lunch with just you guys and stuff like that. And play these songs. And my dad photocopied it, crossed her name out, put his name, changed the songs, and then put that. And then so we're going, he had told us like, go here when this happens and blah, blah. And I opened this and I just remember looking at my brother. I'm like, we are not doing this. And I was like, he would be fine with me changing course. And we had we're not a religious family, so we didn't do anything in a church. At that time, I was renting this really strange cottage outside of New York City on an estate. And we had 80 people come and just talk about my family and my dad. And we got to talk because for me, it was very healing for people to see me grieve. Like, I am sad, be there for me. And I think with not having that moment with my mom, it just sort of felt like, you got to get on with your life kind of thing.
And so then it just, sits inside your body. It doesn't get processed. And with your dad, it sounds like you were very intentional.
Yes. Change course here. Yeah. Like, let's do this a little bit better. And now, I'm married and I'm 35 and I have the TikTok of the woman's biological clock. Yeah. And I knew I wanted to have kids. I also knew it would be a terrible plan to have kids, having just lost both my parents, right? Like, especially just lost my dad. And so, I was like, we have to wait at least 1 year from his death. And my husband was absolutely like, and we had an amazing year where we just really, like, he took care of me. Like, it was awesome. And my siblings and I took care of each other. And then, a year went by and because I had been through so much stuff with my parents, I was like, yeah, I'm not doing like any like home birth. And then I was like, I sent out like a group email to people and I'm like, who's everyone's favorite OBGYN who's like handled the worst case snenario? Yeah, because like, I'm pretty, prepped. Yeah, I was like, I've seen some stuff and someone gave me this OBGYN and my husband and I went to visit him. And I think probably because I'm the youngest of 6 and I kind of had older parents, I really like older people and I like mentorship and I really value it. And he was older and I like that. And I just told him this whole story with my dad and my parents. And he cried, which I remember being like, wow, he doesn't know me from anybody. And then he was like, I went through something similar with my mom. My father's also a doctor. And he was like, even as doctors, it was hard for us in the moment. And he was like, I can only imagine how challenging this must have been for you. And, and I was like, I'm so afraid that it will feel like that, that I'll get pregnant and it will feel like just this stress. I was like, I don't have like a medical experience that's like positive in my mind right now. And he was great. And he was like, having kids is the most profound, hopeful thing you could do. And he was like, you'll hold a baby and it will be not at all like being bedside with someone in that state. And he's like, I totally see how you're worried about this, but, and then he was like, and I will be through this with you and we will do what we need to do so that this works for you. in a way that you have the capacity to handle. He was like, I'm here for you. And there were some challenges actually with that pregnancy, and they all worked out in the end, which was great. And we had our first baby, and it really was awesome. And she was a good sleeper, which really helped.
It does really help. Yeah.
And I didn't make any milk. I had really bad preeclampsia. So like I said, it wasn't perfect. And I didn't make any milk, which I think, I was devastated by. But looking it was like kind of nice. like it made some of that a little bit easier, and my husband could feed her, and it was just restful. It wasn't as bad as you hear sometimes with stuff. And so it wasn't too hard going back to work. Like it was like a really beautiful time. And then we had our second baby, and pretty soon after I got pregnant when they're 2 years apart. So, and similar pregnancy stuff. But now I'm used to it, and, same doctor, obviously. And, really loved that doctor. Just was so grateful that he ended up being my doctor, and still am today. So have the baby and everything was great. I had a really wonderful maternity leave, but it was short because I had unpaid maternity leave, and I had 2 babies in 2 years. And I was at that time the primary, income driver. And we just couldn't afford for me to stay home that long. So I was back at work at 3 months. I think I took 2 extra weeks because of the preeclampsia with the second one. That my doctor was like, I think you should fully be off this medication before you go back. But anyway, so I go back to work. I'm at to work for about a week, and RSV comes into the house, and I just wanted it to be fine. And I love working, and I love doing a good job. And it just kind of felt awful to get back and then kind of have to come back and deal with sick kids. And then Lucy, who's the youngest, she just got really sick, and she turned blue.
Oh my gosh.
At one point. And it was just terrifying. And I, got her into the bathroom with the shower and the nose Frida, which is the greatest invention. I wish my mother had been alive to see the nose Frida. Yeah,
that is pretty remarkable innovation.
To go from the tube, that squeezy thing and getting out a bunch of stuff. And then, she was good again, but obviously called the pediatrician who opened up the office, and I brought her in, and he was wonderful. And her oxygen was a little low, and he was like, we're going to sit and hang out in here for a little while, but she might have to be hospitalized. And I didn't weep or anything, but I just had tears come down. And I didn't know, but we had gone to high school together, but I didn't know that. And someone would tell me later, yeah, he knew your whole story. He knew about your parents and all this stuff. And he was he was like, I have to leave the room because I want to hug you. And he's like, it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I was like, And it was. She was fine. And we all recovered. And I went back to work, but I couldn't recover from it mentally. I just remember being having mixed feelings about, I just wanted this illness to go away. Did I miss it? Did I not take it seriously enough from the start? She almost, she was really in jeopardy for a little bit here. And it just, it just unraveled me. And I just, with going back to work, and then I was just trying to do too much. I had this thing of I would get home from work, and I would make all the food for the next day for the nanny and the kids. And, so that the 2-year-old was having a super healthy organic diet, and just trying, working so hard, not getting to bed until 11. And then the baby would wake up and need to eat. And then at that time we'd move back out of the city, and I was commuting into the city, and I'd have to get up at 5:45, catch a train into New York City, go to work. And work was you know, they weren't necessarily embracing this like new version of me. Like they had been used to this like unencumbered, you know.
Well, it sounds like you've been a doer your whole life.
Like extremely dedicated.
Yeah.
And, you know, now it's like a meeting at 5 at the bar is like not ideal for me. Right. I want to go. If I didn't get on a train by like 6, I wasn't going to see my kids at all that day.
Right.
I left before they got up and I was gone. If I didn't get home in time, they were in bed. And so it was a tricky transition. And I just like remember it was just getting harder to be okay. Like it was getting harder not to cry. And I remember being at the train station and Amtrak trains used to go by really fast. And I was like, I could just lean forward. Like I just remember having a very dark thought and then being like, called the doctor from the train station. And they said, just come here today. Like, and, but the nurse, who knew me, that's not who I talked to on the phone. And I'm normally like very bubbly, nice person. This poor nurse comes in. She's like, "What's up? And how are you?" And then I was like, "I'm okay." And then she was like, "All right, let's do the questionnaire. Are you like having any dark thoughts or whatever?" And I was like, "Mm-hmm." And then I just started. And she was like, "Oh my God. Oh." She was like, I didn't know what this was.
Expected. Yeah.
And she just ran out right away, got the doctor, who I just remember him busting in. And he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No." I was like, I was fine. And then the baby got sick and I'm so tired. And he gave this speech that like really stuck out to me. And he was like, "You know, and he goes, "No offense, I should have just put you on like Zoloft right away. I should have just like given it to you right off the bat." He's like, "You got 2 kids, you got a crazy job." And he was like, and you know, he's like, "Don't even get me started on Pinterest," which I thought was funny, but he was right. Like that was kind of like, I'm looking for the organic recipes and like, you know, what can I make and have my kids explore, you know, all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, he put me on Zoloft and I remember like 5 days into it or whatever, when it finally kicks in. And I remember I was putting my kid to bed and I would just get so much anxiety around putting kids to bed. And it, and like, if any parents are listening, like, I think that's a pretty normal,
Absolutely.
It's like the sun goes down and you're like, oh my God, like, how's it going to go? I had none. I remember feeling really relaxed.
You've noticed the absence.
Oh,
of the
totally.
anxiety.
And I remember being like, oh, this feels good. And that's great. But as I thought about it more, I had like a real issue with some, like, kind of how some of that is handled. And like he didn't, you know, he's a wonderful doctor. It's not like he called my job. Like, that's not the protocol. He didn't call my husband. He didn't, you know, it's just like, take these pills. But there is this part of me is like, is there like a realization that this is extremely difficult? Like, it just suddenly felt like this is almost undoable. And it really is so hard to be 2 working parents. Imagine single parents, like you have kids get sick, you know, and it was just sort of like, wow, this is like, it just really came to my realization of how hard this is. And then I had some other feelings about it too. Like why doesn't, you know, I remember being like to my husband, like, do they ever ask you at the doctor? Like, are you, and he was like, after you have children, the mothers ask, like, are you thinking about hurting yourself or the baby? You know, which I understand why, but no dads are asked this question. And he was like, if someone asked me that question, I would be so mad. And I was like, that's such an interesting response. Yeah. And it's not like, I get it, you know? And anyway, so, you know, a lot of how we ended up here was like, I just wanted a different pace. But for us to live in that area, we really had to make a certain amount of money, and there was just going to be like a certain level of intensity around it. And it's part of what got us here was I was just like, I just want to be able to see my kids. I like the idea. Oh, and the doctor in that speech, and he was like, and you have dead parents. And he was like, this is a terrible scenario. And I just wanted to be closer to my sister was up here and we were really close, and my brother's up here and we're really close. And again, it's that like, what's the action I can take that's maybe going to alleviate some of this, or just the hope, like the optimism of like, we could address this and keep going.
And that is really powerful. And I think that moment, is very notable, standing on that train platform, and you recognized the dark thought.
Yeah.
And you believed if you reached out for help, someone was going to respond.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's part of the legacy of what your parents gave you by the deep love and nurturing that they gave you. Is that a belief that, you can pull together, humans will help each other.
Yeah.
And it's, and that shapes who we are if we believe that.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different picture if we don't believe that.
Yeah.
Julie, what role when we look at all of these together, we look at the trajectory of your life from your experiences very close to 9/11, all the way through the experiences of saying goodbye to your parents in such dramatic ways, in really painful ways, and then postpartum depression setting in.
Yeah.
And you look at the arc of all of that in your life. How do you make sense of that?
I mean, I don't know. I think.
And when I say that, when I realize when I'm asking, like, how do you make sense of that? I think what I'm actually asking is, because you have the vantage point of lived experience over time, and the recognition that all of those sorts of events shape our lives. They shape who we are.
Yeah.
Positive, negative, in between, no judgment associated with it, just sort of shapes who we are. And now here you are today. How have those experiences shifted you, shaped you?
I had to learn not to compare everything to huge experiences, for sure, especially after my parents died, because you can kind of miss that maybe you are being impacted by something, but I would be like, well, I'm not like making a life or death decision today. I'm not watching carnage from, you know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah. So everything becomes so very relative.
Yeah.
And
like
it's ignore,
which is, it's nice to have a lot of perspective.
It's a lot of perspective, Julie.
Like,
Julie, that's a lot of perspective.
But sometimes it's a little too much. Right. And it really, like, even with the 9/11 stuff, it wasn't really till my mother was gone that the note, the list of numbers, the just wanting to get home to them, and that I really put that experience as a part of the story of whatever it is, whether it's grief or whatever. I think, it's tricky too, because it's like, I remember, this is kind of random, but like, I remember I was, I don't know, maybe middle school or like late elementary school, we're on vacation, and my dad was like having like an off day, and I was like, you okay? Or something like that. And then he told this really sad story of an accident that happened that when he was a kid, and it was him and 3 friends, and one of the kids drowned. And he was like, it's the anniversary of that experience, and it's just something that I'm just having an off day. Like, and I'm just, what a gift, right? Like,
what a gift.
I'm just having an off day. Like, I'm just having, sometimes there's, it is what it is. I have certain things like prior to 9/11, I watch way too much like 9/11 stuff. Like, it's like no therapist would be like, this is a good plan to deal with this. But I feel some like moral obligation because I saw it. Yeah. And to the victims, I don't know why, particularly people who were making phone calls. I just sort of feel like,
that sounds like a way you're honoring what you witnessed.
Yes. Yeah. Like I was standing there watching you in this moment. And, but I think it, I can't handle like a lot of stress. Like I am someone that like,
Yeah.
like people have said many times, like, wow, it's really stressful and you're handling it really well. And I think it's definitely built that resilience piece.
Yeah, we call that post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
That it's really one of the small gifts that trauma leaves behind is the capacity for remarkable growth.
Yeah.
And it's painful, and we don't want people to go through those things.
Right.
But that friction does create the opportunity for growth.
And I think too, I like to believe that I have like a, like if you are grieving, you can always talk to me. Like I get it. And, it's really painful. And, I had a friend who would go through something similar very shortly after I did at work. And, we were talking about it, and I remember I was like, I remember a family that we had a family from Serbia in our town, and the husband died really unexpectedly pretty young, and the wife and the children were all Black for a very long time, and it's looked very out of place in my town, but I thought about it all the time after that, like to sort of tell the world, right? Like I am grieving, like, and we were talking about that, and I was like, there's something to it, like, and this girl was like, oh my God, I fantasize all the time about a pin that says, just be gentle with me, just like take it easy, like I'm not who I am, and I think it's important to note, like, you can get back, like you might not be exactly the same, but I don't have any of those feelings today, like with the postpartum stuff and like sleep deprivation is, it's significant. Like, it is significant and it's a part of grief too. Like you just don't sleep well. It's kind of wild to me that everyone's like going back to work, like dying of sleep deprivation, like, when they have babies.
Our society's not set up well for the health of new parents.
No.
It's really not. And I think it's really impactful for you to share that you had a postpartum experience, especially because so many women and men as well just put on a face and just keep on going when in all reality.
I absolutely think there needs to be more sort of talked about on the men's.
Absolutely.
I don't see how it couldn't be.
Yeah, it impacts them. Postpartum experience emotionally impacts men.
Yeah. I don't know. I just always find that really interesting. So, I don't know. It just sort of, and it's, I almost would say, I can't really say, because how could you ever speculate on the life that you didn't have? But because of how we were raised, even my dad talking about that, like I'm having an off day. Maybe anyway, I would have, I don't know.
It sounds like part of the legacy of your family is a deep connection to each other, which is a very trauma-informed way of being. Yeah. A sense of like, we're in this together. Yeah. So which put you in a place where you did reach out for help. You did create connections in your life. You moved up here and you're with family now. Yeah. All those beautiful pieces that help us be resilient. Yeah. That believe that we will take care of each other in this world. A boss who gave you $50 for lottery cards, even that. Well, maybe he didn't recognize that was a sign that something was up. Yeah. It was also an act of support of you. Yeah. And a recognition of, I think she needs this lottery thing right about now.
He probably was like, God, it would be great for her if she won. Right?
Exactly. Is there anything we haven't talked about, or anything you thought I would ask you about today, or something that you would like folks to know?
I think that, I don't know if it relates to any of this or not, but there's like so much. Sometimes it feels like, even talking about this, it feels somewhat risky. And it feels like there's so much pressure to do things perfectly. Yeah. And because of that, I feel like we don't take a lot of risks. I don't know. I just sort of, I think that, Like, you could take these risks and you can talk about these things, and it's not going to be perfect, and it's okay.
And that's why I asked you, Julie, to come on today. And I'm so grateful to you, because what you did by sharing these stories with us, by showing that vulnerable piece of your experience, pieces of your experience, that is a gift to the rest of us. And it's a risk. Yeah. Because you've opened your heart up a little bit, and you have shown us something that honestly we wouldn't see if you didn't choose to speak about it.
Yeah. And get help. Like, we talked about this a little bit, that I was in and out of therapy, especially like with my mom dying and all that kind of stuff, for a while. And with the postpartum too, which kind of was less effective, honestly. Honestly, that speech from my doctor was so effective. Like it was.
Sounds like it was really validating.
Yeah, it was just sort of like oh my God, of course. Like, and then so it was not a long event. And then when I came here, I was like, it's good to have therapy, especially with, it was COVID, and COVID was hard when you had I had two kids at home, and it was hard for everybody. And I remember just being like, this is like really hard. And a really wonderful therapist that I found locally. And really sort of helped me even see these connections through these experiences. And, just like, just to get some clarity on how good do you have to be? You don't need to be freaking Michael Jordan every day of your life. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be the Michael Jordan of parenting. You don't have to be like give people space, like, just really helped. I don't know. It was really, really helpful. And so that would be a thing that I would also recommend is like, and don't stay with a therapist that you don't necessarily are, feeling like is benefiting.
Yeah. And that's something that's near and dear to us here at MAPS, is we want the fit between the person seeking some support and the therapist to be spot on, because that's where the vulnerable pieces can happen. So thank you for sharing that with our readers, and thank you for being here today. We wrap up every episode with something we call trail mix. So it's a little bit of something to carry with you on the road. And for today, I grabbed a few sentences, a few lines from an Emily Dickinson poem, a woman who knew suffering quite well. And she says, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." So I leave that for you.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. I love that.
And to our listeners, thank you for spending some time with us today. Take good care of yourselves and each other. And wherever you are on your path, we are honored to walk alongside you.